So, nice to meet you all. My name's Steve, and I am a developer, architect type guy at Microsoft, and I work on the .NET team, particularly focusing on web-related stuff, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, to understand really where we are in the whole sort of timeline of the web ecosystem, let's look at a timeline, specifically right back to where things started. So, the web was invented right at the start of the early 90s, and if you wanted to create some kind of web UI at that time, there was only one way to do it. You had to write server-rendered HTML. So you would use a technology like CGI, which is a way of connecting your web server to an arbitrary executable to produce some content, and then you would use something like Perl or PHP to actually script your server to emit some HTML. And then later on, people moved to things like web forms, Django, Rails, and other stuff like that. And that was all we could do back then. It was all we knew. But eventually, people started to outgrow this, because there was this movement around 2005 for a few years, which was called Web 2.0 at that time. And this was a time when people were really strongly incentivized to produce better and better user interfaces in order to try and drive more engagement with their web applications. And so at this point, people really started to write some JavaScript. And at that time, it was a horrible language. Of course, it's not now. It's great now, but it was an abomination back then. And so in order to try and cope with this, people had to use libraries like jQuery that made the thing manageable. And that was great for about 5 years, until people started to outgrow it, because they started to write so much code that their application just became an unmaintainable mess. And that's when the first client rendering frameworks came in. They tried to bring some kind of structure to client-side code, structures like MVC, MVVM, running in the browser. And we had names like Backbone, Knockout, Angular, this first wave of client rendering technologies. Again, it was great for a little while, until people outgrew it. By about 2015, people's client-side applications were too big, even for these early client-side architectures. And that brought us into the era of modern client-side rendering. And I think the biggest game-changing thing there was React. When that was introduced in about 2015, that showed people a whole different component-oriented way of building their client-side applications with a new kind of syntax, and it was very popular, and a lot of other frameworks came along to try and follow on from that and refine that technique. And again, that's been great, but we're starting to outgrow it again. And this time, it's because we've got so much code running in the browser now that it's starting to become a performance issue. It's starting to become a usability issue for people with low-end devices as well. And so there's an emerging collection of web frameworks which are now starting to move things to the server as well. So we went from server to the client, and we're now trying to do server and client at the same time.